It's a love of the game that I've had ever since I was small. It was born in the yard with my dad, with a glove and a bat and a ball. It's a love of the game that I'm trying to explain. From the ghost of the past to the legends that last. It's a love of the game. Man, I love baseball.
The 1950s. That was a simpler time in America. For many young people, transportation meant your bike or the bus. It was a time when there were 2 TV channels, maybe 3, but only if your antenna was aimed just right. And it was a time for most boys when summer meant baseball.
I can never forget the first time I ever got a uniform for any kind of organized baseball, and it was for Ballards. And I was so happy as probably a 10 or 11-year-old that I could not take that uniform off that day when I finally got my first uniform.
When they put together Little League Baseball, Babe Ruth League Baseball, and American Legion Baseball, this park became our second home. I probably spent as many hours here as I did anywhere in this city outside of my own home.
This is a story about baseball in a small American city in the 1950s. It's a story about boys who played the game at a very special place and about the men who coached them. Perhaps the same story could be told about boys and their coaches in hundreds, maybe thousands of American towns in the 1950s. Indeed, this story is universal. But to the young men who played baseball in Ashland, Kentucky, no other place had the magic of CP1. In the 1950s, the sports section of the Ashland Daily Independent listed all the games for the coming week at Central Park. The schedule for the smaller field was abbreviated as CP2. And above that, you'd see the listings for where the big boys played. CP1.
We grew up in this park and just made so many friends here, and it was great to come down. Even when we weren't part of a team growing up, you could bring your glove down here and your bat and ball. There was always somebody on one of these diamonds that was playing catch or hitting fungos or just hitting grounders. So it was really terrific, and you could stay down here all day and play just about as much baseball as you wanted.
In the summer of 2008, hundreds of boys, now men in their 60s, who had played baseball at CP1, came back for a reunion.
I made a journey back in time to a place where the boy who still lives inside me once played baseball. I heard the talk of summer days in wooden bats and flannel uniforms, and I realized that we are all still boys.
I would ride my bike. I never drove a car until I got to college. So I rode my bike over top of what I call the mountain down into Central Park, and we would get there early in the morning during the summer, and we'd play all day. There was no organized summer ball when I was in the 8th and 9th grade. We would go down, choose up sides, and people would choose this person and that person, and we'd take the bat and figure out who the last person was that would get to choose, and we would start, and there was always enough of us there to play.
Central Park was our babysitter. They took care of all of us all day long. We'd give it our 6 hours, our 8 hours, our 10 hours, and these guys played their hearts out. We brought all the stuff under our beds. We picked up our broken bats, our baseballs, our softballs, and we'd give it a good 8-10 hours a day.
For many boys in the late 1940s and into the 50s, playing baseball at Central Park was pickup games. Come to the park, bring your glove, or borrow one, and find a game. A few boys, though, played in YMCA-sponsored leagues, the Midget League and Pony League. Back then, only a couple of teams had uniforms, paid for by sponsors Standard Oil and Ballard's TV.
I started, I think it was age 8 on my dad's Pony League team. And my job as a little runt was to, in batting, I could hold my own for the one ball a season that was hit to right field. But my job at bat was to get up there and crouch and draw walks.
I have been fortunate in my coaching career to play in Duke, Cameron Indoor Stadium, Carolina, Maryland, Alabama, all those places, been to Guantanamo, been all kind of things. But the greatest memory that I have in my sporting career is going to Cincinnati on the train to play in the Knot-Hove tournament, riding a train down there, going to see a Cincinnati Reds baseball game, and going to Coney Island. Greatest memory in my life.
Probably around 7, 8 years old. I was a little young boy. And Don Clear, who was a great football player here at Ashland, Don was probably 6, 7, 8 years ahead of me in school. And he would ride me on his bicycle and bring me down here to the park, and we would play. And I played with all the older boys all the time. And we had a great time. That's where I was first exposed to playing baseball in the park.
Weekends would get on our bike and come down here, throw our gloves across the handlebars and ride down 13th Street Hill and come up to the park. And we'd spend here all day shagging balls and just playing with anybody who would stop and throw with us or play with us.
One of the things that we had was baseball at each of the grade schools. I was fortunate enough to play for Hager, and we would have a one day in Central Park where we got to play, and we played on the big diamond. Of course, we used the shorter softball version of it, but I played center field with a first baseman's mitt. I can remember going down to Ben Williamson, had a paper route, and took that hard-earned money and bought a first baseman's mitt because I loved Ted Klaszewski.
In the mid-1950s, a group of local men greatly expanded youth baseball in Ashland. In 1955, Little League play began. 2 years later, Babe Ruth League baseball came to Ashland. And in 1959, Junior American Legion baseball completed the lineup.
I was fortunate to play in the first Little League game in Ashland history. I can recall talking about signing up for Little League. I remember right here, David, looking out on this field, coming over from Carter Avenue. There were huge boxes, cardboard boxes spread all around, and what that was new baseball equipment. It was new baseballs. I never played with a new baseball in my life. Even when we were Standard Oil and the YMCA ran those leagues, we never had a brand new baseball in our hand. It was full of bats. It was full of catcher's equipment that guys that were catchers never played with before. You talked about a Christmas day in the spring. Something kind of interesting and that I remember so vividly, we had these gray wool uniforms that itched you. They were the real wool. They weren't flannel or anything soft. It was wool. The first game was going to be around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we all came over early. We're so excited, and the first thing the managers did was they gave us a brush and a can of paint. We actually painted the outfield fence on opening day. I got green paint on my uniform, and it was on there the whole season, but I do recall that vividly, and it was kind of one of those things that, I don't know if you get kids to do that nowadays, but back then we were so excited to be here that we would have done anything they asked, but we painted that outfield fence that opening day.
They threw the ball into me, and I stroked it, and it went over the left field fence, as I recall, and I was tickled to death and got back to the dugout, and the cameraman came over there with Jack Floyd sitting right next to me and took a picture of us, and it was history after that.
When this was a Little League park right here, which was part of CP1, okay, we won the Little League Championship of Ashland, and I hit a home run. And I will never forget it. It was a 3-run blast that just barely cleared the fence. And we ended up winning that year, which was, I still remember it. I mean, for all of the decades and decades of sporting events I've been involved with, it still is in the back of my mind.
I started out on the mound pitching, and Steve was catching. And I walked the first batter and hit the second batter, and then walked the third batter. So the manager comes out and he says, Bill, he says, I don't think you have it today. So he switched Steve and I, put me behind the plate, put Steve on the mound. So Steve finishes the game and he pitched a no-hitter. So at that time, the media would give us a write-up in the paper. So the next day it came out and said, Bill Myers twirls no-hitter. So I still have that article, and every time Steve gets a little on his high horse, I pull that article out and show it to him, just to remind him that his big brother was part of that twin no-hitter.
When you're in Pony League, you didn't have a uniform, but when you got to be Little League, we'd put the uniforms on, and instead of thumbing downtown, get to school, whatever, we'd walk, and we'd throw that tie our shoes together, throw it across our shoulder, and walk downtown, and it's all about the uniform too. It was just a thrill to be associated with the baseball at that age, and I just can't imagine the pride that we had and the memories we look back over those years.
Back then, the boys all had their dreams of being big league ball players. Those dreams began in backyards and on neighborhood vacant lots. And brick walls became stadiums where baseball dreams were acted out.
Spawns on the mound. 3-2 count. Takes a sign. He pitches.
And in those bubblegum card days of their youth, the boys knew the names of baseball players better than the names of U.S. presidents.
We had Big Clue at first, and you had Johnny Temple at second. You had Roy McMillan at short, and Ray Jablonski at third. Probably Ewell the Whip Blackwell. You know, we all remember that left-handed pitcher. And you had Harry Perkowski. You had Herman Wiemeyer. You had Professor Kenny Raffensperger. I don't know why he was professor, but that's what Wade Hoyd always called him, Professor Kenny Raffensperger. He may have finished high school. That may have been the way.
As the boys moved up from Little League to Babe Ruth League, their skills increased, and so did their self-confidence.
The experiences in Babe Ruth League really got me going because I was struggling in athletics at that time. I was always kind of on a periphery player, and when I got in and got that season underway and started improving and getting better through playing here in Ashland, I really caught on to sports heavier at that time, and when I got selected for the All-Star team that year, I felt like I was kind of riding the coattails of J.D. Brown, because he was our pitcher and got us further on into the champions. We won the city championship, and this is actually the original trophy without the little tag line. I couldn't find that; it's been lost. But this is the first trophy I had ever won, and so you might suspect that we get lost in the shuffle, and it did get lost for many years. But when Gary Wright started this activity of pulling together the action from the past and trying to hunt up people and places and names and the history, I pulled this out, found it, and that's actually the trophy.
My first hero was never on a baseball card. He never played at Crosley Field or Ebbets Field. I never saw him on our black and white TV. My first hero, I can still hear his voice as he would say to me, "Let's go throw some."
Robert Wright was a played baseball. Robert was 2 years ahead of me, but I thought Robert was one of the best baseball players. He could play any position on the field, and Robert was probably my hero as far as baseball is concerned, because I looked up to him, and he was such an outstanding player that he was one of my heroes.
My first hero, baseball hero, would be my brother Bill Lynch. As we were growing up, he kind of set the standard for us, and as he got better and better, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get better and better at playing the game of baseball, and as we progressed, he obviously became a tremendous pitcher, and that's really what I wanted to do.
The early heroes were Don Castle. Don was just an exceptional person. He'd always come pick us up on Sunday, and he'd have a carload of kids, and we would either go to the bluegrass field up there or come down here to Central Park.
My number one hero, I have to tell you, wasn't a big leaguer. It was always my dad. But the guy that I admired most in baseball was Robert Wright. Robert Wright coached me 2 or 3 years, helped his dad coach, and I think, other than maybe my father, Robert Wright taught me more about baseball.
The Big Diamond at Central Park held an almost mystic allure for boys in Ashland, but it was also a magnet for ball players from the smaller surrounding towns who wanted to play under the lights at CP1.
I was one of those kids that lived in the Westwood area that, we didn't have any baseball fields, organized baseball in Westwood, so we had to go to Ashland. I was the first one to break into the organized baseball in the city of Ashland. The shortcut through Tunnel Hill and walking on the railroad tracks was our way of saving time, and early in the morning when we were going to Central Park, there was not a lot of traffic out, so we cut through the tunnel, walked the railroad tracks, and all of us ended up in Central Park and played ball.
And I started playing baseball at Boyd County. And I was a junior in high school in '59. They started a Legion team here, had tryouts. It was wonderful. Was selected with the old Armco team. You had Armco Ashland Oil, Sanitary Milk, and Westwood Boys Club.
When the boys weren't playing baseball, they were thinking about it. Hitting rocks with a broomstick. Playing wiffle ball. Playing baseball board games. And going to sleep listening to Wade Hoyt broadcast Cincinnati Reds games on the radio.
That ties the score, 4-4.
I would go to bed at night with the radio underneath my blanket, listening to Wade Hoyt do the Cincinnati Reds, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. My experience, that's where I also developed, in addition, I always had a love of the game, my love for broadcasting.
And so when Wade Hoyt would go on to do the road games, he did it through, Western Union and a ticker tape. And you'd hear tick, 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 or whatever, and then Wade would read it and tell you what happened. And yet he would do it in such a way as if he were at the ball game, If you listen to Wade's tapes or records and so forth, you've heard him tell the story that one time that when they were in Philadelphia, and this is particularly true of us guys who remember Richie Ashburn so well, fine banjo hitter, but he's a Hall of Famer, and that's what counts. And so Ashburn was up at bat, and they lost their connection. And so Wade had Richie Ashburn foul off 12 or 14 pitches. He'd foul, there's a little nubber off to the dugout. Here's one up behind the plate or wherever. And then finally came back on, and Ashburn being the typical Richie Ashburn, I believe he drew a base on balls, which he did a lot of that type of thing. And so, you know, but we could picture all that. Now I think kids today miss it.
We had a garage door right in front of my house. Put drew a plate on it, and we threw tennis balls at each other day in and day out all summer long.
On Hackworth Street, where I was raised, there was many, there was about 35 or 40 kids at that time on that street. So we did a lot of unorganized baseball, wiffle ball, and that sort of thing. There was always a game going on in someone's backyard, and that's pretty much what we did in the summer. There wasn't video games, or very few of us went to the swimming pool, simply because we loved to play ball. Because I can remember at one point in time, we actually, before we had lights around here, and we actually rigged lights up in the backyard and played at night. And we just had a great time. You know, it was just something that you did all day, every day.
As I recall, our Babe Ruth League was pretty competitive. One of the things I do recall was that opposing batters would hand me my catcher's mask after I'd flipped it off, going after a pass ball or a foul ball or something like that. They usually have a big grin on their face as they hand me my catcher's mask. The reason for that big smile was the fact that they'd rubbed that catcher's mask in the dirt, in the sand. And I could feel all that sand and grit on my faces. Eventually I learned, it took me a while, to go ahead and whack that catcher's mask against my shin pads and rub it down my thigh a couple of times before I put it on. That's the way it was in our Babe Ruth League.
We were out here one day, I think somebody had a poke and chewing tobacco, and Mike tried that. And last I remember, he was going behind the dugout, you know. He just couldn't hardly handle it. None of us could handle that chewing tobacco, so.
If we had any money, during the time out during the day, we'd go over that corner store that was right across from Central Park. We'd have RCs and bologna sandwiches and moon pies and buying the sausages, and that's what we play all day. Then I get on my bike and go back up over the mountain, back to the house I lived on Elm Street.
The first foreign language I learned was baseball. I was 8 the first time I played. I stood at the plate holding a huge Louisville slugger. "Hold the green up," somebody hollered, "and choke up on the bat." Then somebody shouted, "There are ducks on the pond, and don't put your foot in the bucket." The first pitch came and I closed my eyes and swung and heard somebody say Texas Leaguer as I ran to first base. Then my coach said, "Oh no, shoestring catch." As I sat on the sidelines, I heard 0 for 1. Then as our team took the field, someone said, "Hey kid, you're the hind catcher." I had no idea what they were talking about, any of it. But I soon learned to speak the language of baseball fluently.
Okay, it's the payoff pitch. Give him a roundhouse.
What was Ashland like in the 1950s? 2 words: simple pleasures. Downtown parades, Halloween parties, city pool, soapbox derby, Paramount Theater, Boy Scouts, Sunday church.
Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, starring the entire Nelson family.
While the 1950s appeared to be an Ozzie and Harriet world, that wasn't the case for everyone. In the mid-1950s, much of America was racially segregated, and many elected officials showed no desire to change that.
17 states have mandatory segregation. 4 states have permissive segregation, but at one time the overwhelming majority of the states in the Union had segregation. Now the white people in the South and also the Negroes in the South want it left alone, just like it is.
But change was happening. Little by little, each town in America had its own youthful version of Jackie Robinson. In Ashland, those pioneers were Bob Simpson and Reese Banks.
We were ball players. Right. You know, we played baseball. That's what we wanted to do, is play baseball. And fortunately, the guys that we played baseball with was great. Had no problem whatsoever out of the teammates or opponents that we went up against. It's just super. And I guess some of the adults were the ones that we had problems with that stood in the way of actual ball playing. The coaches were super. They gave us opportunities to do some things. Eddie Smith had talked to me. He says, "Hey, I want you to come play with us." I said, "No problem." And I practiced a couple of times. No one said anything. But then game day, he said, "Okay, let's take the field." And I grabbed my glove, ran out to right field, and then all of a sudden one of the league officials came on the field and says, "No, no, no." He says, "He can't play. He cannot play." Now the rest of the guys, you know, looked around at it. They didn't know what was going on. They did not know a thing of what was going on, but the game was held up, and I remember Eddie and the official got into an argument, things of this nature, and then Eddie said, "Well," he said, "I'm sorry." He said, "I got to apologize to you." He says, "But believe me," he said, "next year this is not going to happen." And I believed him, and he fulfilled his promise to me because I was able to play.
When Bob Simpson's team went to the state tournament in 1957, he and his teammates had a surprise waiting. When the team went to check into the hotel, the people at the front desk had other ideas.
They didn't want me to stay with the guys. They wanted to put me on the other side of the town where all the black people stay. And the guys and the coaches said, "No, where we stay, he stays." The teams were our home, our friends.
Oh yeah, that was it. You know, once we got with the team, we felt at home. We were at home. That was our buddies. That was our support system.
If a boy played baseball in the 1950s, you can be pretty sure that he had dreams of playing in the major leagues. But for all of the 1950s players at CP1, the big league dream eventually died.
Another tryout that I remember going to, Mr. Johnny Oliverio, who ran the shoe store down Carter Avenue in Ashland, had a son, Paul Oliverio, that was a pretty good pitcher. And myself, and I think Reese Banks and Paul Oliverio went to, I believe it was Huntington. They might have been even Charleston for a tryout with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Mr. Oliverio had a contact with the Pirates. So we went up there for a tryout, and my pitching was okay up there. But then what they obviously wanted to do was check your speed too. So one of the things they had was everybody get on like the left field line, and so just on the count of 3, we're going to race and go about 100 yards out there. And so we were all lined up there, and of course I knew I wasn't going to win that race, but I was just trying to finish and do as well as I could. And then right out of the starting blocks when he said go, what I remember is taking about 2 steps and going straight down because I tripped on something. So as you try to do, realizing that you tripped, I tried to get up, but Reese said I went like a bunny for about 5 or 10 feet as he was looking back at me, see. Well, I never did finish that, so I don't know where I ranked on the speed skills. But again, the Pittsburgh Pirates never called me back, so those are my memories, lax as they are, of having a couple of tryouts.
We played University of Kentucky, and Cotton Nash was first baseman that day, and I was on third. I knew he could hit, but I wasn't sure how good a hitter he was. The ball was hit so hard at third. I got my glove on it. It literally hit the glove, took the glove. It goes right on out in left field. Ball, glove, the whole bit. And I'm thinking, you know, I wasn't going to the majors because that was competition I knew I wasn't going to be able to stand up to.
We played in a tournament over at Portsmouth, and I can remember Gene Bennett, which is a scout with the Reds. He played for a team called Deemer's Market. They had an exceptional ball team. And I pitched a one-hitter against them one night, and the next day or so, Gene got in touch with me, and there was 3 of us fellas went to Cincinnati with him. I was there, I don't know, maybe 4 days. Room with Don Pavletic, which was a catcher. Fred Hutchison was there when I was down there, and I got to throw in front of him. And he was always wanting me to throw a curveball, and I just could not throw one that was any good. And he would tell you, you know, hey, it's not worth a darn, you know.
When we got to Kingsport, Tennessee, Henderson, Selby, and I had driven down there and checked in, and we were doing our warm-ups. One of the Pittsburgh people had us over on the sideline, and we were going to go in and throw a couple innings, each of us. And as we were warming up, getting ready, one of the Pittsburgh people made a comment which really got my attention. He said, the difference between a major leaguer and a wannabe is when you cross that foul line to go into the main field. He said, you guys throw well over here, but can you really throw when you go in on the mound? He said, that's what we're looking for. And good ball players there, Latin American players, could hit the ball, they were fast. We ran wind sprints, and I was pretty quick, but they beat me. I mean, they were a little bit quicker than I was. So there's better ball players there.
So at that time, I started noticing, you know, that guys would hang around the ballpark, scouts, and we'd get phone calls, and a lot of letters came to the house. And through the next 3 years, through high school, you had a lot of people doing those very things, making phone calls, you know, coming to the game, talking to you after the game, and a lot of attention, you know, was headed my way, and it's hard to handle when you're that young, not knowing how to do it. It can overwhelm you at times. And Cleveland picked me in the 2nd round of the draft in '66, and from that point on, you know, my career kind of went downhill because I had a bad arm. But the involvement with the big league part of the game really started when I was 15 years old. And now that I look back on it, you know, if I'd taken care of myself and done the right things and had a little more attention paid to the welfare of my arm, may have been a different story.
No, none of the CP1 boys of the 50s made the majors. But in the next generation, there was a left-handed pitcher from McKell High School who played many games at Central Park. And at age 19, Don Gullett made his major league debut with the Cincinnati Reds. The Red Scout who signed Don Gullett 40 years ago remembers seeing Gullett pitch at CP1.
Actually, when I first, well, to start with, I had a tryout camp in Iron, Ohio, across the river, and he was in the 8th grade. And I had a bird dog guy, you know, that helped round up players to get into my tryout camp. So he said, hey, he said, I know where there's a little left-hander that can really throw. He said he can really throw. But I said, the only thing is he's about 14 years old. And I said, if he throws like you said he can throw, bring him over. And I know he come over and I said, now, just take your time because you're not going to go through all these other drills. Because I understand that you can throw as good as some of the guys in the big league, you know. So I told him, I said, when this is over with, I'm going to keep about 8 or 10, I don't remember what it was now, players, and I want you to pitch to these players. So I kept, I think it was maybe 9, I'm not sure about that. So every one of those were players like from Ohio University, the college players. Ohio University, Marshall, at the time it was Morris Harvey and Charleston. And I said, now, get good and loose, and when you get good and loose, well then I just want you to pitch like we're playing a game. So he struck out the first 6, and I said, hold it there, partner. I says, you sure you're okay now? I says, that's enough. I don't need you. He said, oh, I can get them next 3 out too. Well, he struck them guys out too. And I told him, I said, listen, I'll never come to see you play again until you're a senior.
In 1984, an Ashland boy who played at CP1 was the number 3 first-round pick in the Major League Draft.
During my sophomore year in college, the scouts started to show up, and Steve Hamilton had a lot to do with that. He developed me as a pitcher and put me in situations to help me along with that. He would pair me up against Steve Engel, who was a pitcher that was getting scouted a lot and ended up getting drafted that year by the Cubs in the second round. And Steve would pair me against Steve on the weekends. I would pitch against him and generally win against Eastern. And so the scouts would come to watch Steve Engel pitch, and they'd get to see me pitch, and it sort of got me on the map. Gene Bennett started coming in to watch me throw, and the Reds invited me to a tryout camp at Riverfront. And Gene talked to me at that camp and told me that, you know, we would sign you right now to a contract except you're going to be a junior. And that's when I started to have the idea that I might have the ability to pitch at a higher level than college. So the next year came back, and I had just an outstanding year at Moorhead for Steve Hamilton again, and ended up going 9-1. They sent me to the Shenandoah Valley League Summer League team, and just had the game of my life. Struck out 22 batters in 9 innings, and that was maybe 4 or 5 days before the draft. And so that was my, I pitched that one game that year in the Shenandoah Valley League, and like I say, had the game of my life. And the draft was a week later, and Cubs picked me 3rd.
Today, there are 3 alumni of CP1 in the major leagues.
Started off T-ball there and played there. And then I played minor league ball. I played all of my little league and minor league and T-ball there right on 22nd Street. And then moved to Waterworks, I think, my last year of little league, and then back over to the Big Diamond on 22nd Street for high school and summer ball. And so almost all the memories that I have of baseball are right there at that corner.
One of the things that I've always done that stands out in my mind as a memory is a full moon over a field. I don't think there's anything prettier. I mean, I can think back in the minor leagues to a full moon over Sarasota, a full moon over Scranton. The way the moon comes up over a field, you'd be working and you see the big full moon. It may sound strange or funny or corny, but to think about that big full moon in Ashland, and how when it was hazy here in the summertime, you'd see that orange kind of tint to it. This kind of things that you remember about Ashland growing up.
I like the setting of it, just being kind of a public park, but being, in there with all the trees and stuff.
When I was a kid, it was just okay to ride your bicycle from where I lived out by Hager down to the park and just spend every day of the summer, ride my bike down, play all day long. Most of it wasn't organized. We only practiced once or twice a week. But I can remember going over to the Babe Ruth games and the diamond looking so big and just having fun chasing the foul balls and returning them, and occasionally you got a Coke or something from the concession stand because you returned the foul balls. And those are still precious memories to me, that every day was about baseball in the park.
Definitely whenever I'm at Cincinnati, whenever I get the fans that come up from Ashland, I can remember a lot of them being down there at the park and rooting me on then, whether it be some teammates or some of my teammates' parents that still go up to Cincinnati. I'll be down there and I'll see them on the fence or somewhere out there, and they were down there cheering for me then when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and still doing it here in the big league. So it's neat to see those people out there and supporting me.
Baseball memories from our youth are very, very strong, even for a Hall of Fame pitcher.
And I started playing regular baseball when I was about 15. Up to then we played mostly softball, and we'd hit 100 times and have 4 men on a team, that sort of thing. And we didn't have an organized baseball program. until probably the American Legion started about 14 or 15. That's when we first were organized. Otherwise, we had games among ourselves, and we had a backyard ball diamond and kept batting averages. I remember one of the best players was a girl named Doris Kuhn. She was our best player up to about 15, and then she disappeared. I don't know where she went, but she didn't make the major leagues.
I'm attracted to sporting goods stores, the way some men are attracted to hardware stores. There's something about baseball gloves and spikes that turns me into a kid again. When I smell glove leather, I see my first glove, and I can tell you exactly where I was when I got it. And as I recall my first real baseball spikes, steel spikes, I remember how that was a coming-of-age moment for me. The only comparable feeling was getting my driver's license a few years later. And guess where I drove on my first solo trip? To the big ballpark with my glove and spikes in the back seat.
The boys who played at CP1 in the 1950s thought they were just playing baseball. But they discovered many, many years later that they had learned a lot about life as well.
This place right here formed my life values. Taught me how to compete, how to mix with other people, how to work together with other people to achieve a goal, accept other people for what they were. It just taught me life skills that have stayed with me all my life.
The sense of appreciation. I had no idea what sacrifices, how much time they gave, and probably resources that the coaches gave to us. We as kids, we had nothing else to do. These people, as we look back now, they were raising families. Who knew what was going on? They had kids of their own, and they would be there every time. If somebody needed a ride home, you could get a ride. I was lucky enough that I could ride a bicycle. So that was, I think just the sacrifices of their time and resources that those coaches made, nobody appreciated at that time. You were just a kid.
All of those adults that were around when we were kids, they're the ones that really deserve all of this that we're doing here this afternoon. Because had it not been for them, none of this would have been created. I mean, the Ernie Chattons and the Bo McMillans and the Wendy Kazees and the Bob Hatchers and the Cecil Bushes and the George Conrads. I mean, all of these men who decided to put together this program for all these kids just made it so much better for all of us. It gave us such a great foundation. It gave us a chance to play athletically in the summertime when we didn't have anything to do except create our own baseball games, which is not a bad idea, by the way.
Life is a journey, and you need to enjoy that journey or that trip. You know, roll the window down and see the sights. And these are the things that I hope and I know, growing up right here in this park and this diamond down in there, that we were able to roll our windows down and see the people emerge into successful people in the latter years, and it has to be tied to their affiliation with their sports backgrounds in Ashland, Kentucky.
Yes, I think youth baseball had a lot to do with the integration in our city in Ashland. Once you played ball with Reese Banks and Bobby Bryant, people like that, you knew that there wasn't any difference other than the color of their skin. Those were people, good people, friends that would do anything for you and without asking. And there's just no difference in anybody else. And that's a lesson that stuck with me for many years. Still rings in my mind.
You come out of your shell, and CP1 was the perfect place to do it because Central Park was ideally named because it was in the center of a small town. Every kid that wanted to play ball could play ball. You could get there on foot, a bike on a bus. The whole culture of a small town in the 50s was based on that. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody got along. Everybody played together. And it was all played out on CP1.
Now, if I don't go to college and I get that degree, if I don't have the ability of having a background, having already done play-by-play, which I did in college, if I don't have that history of Central Park baseball, if I don't have that history of the passion for the game, what other city, what other place in Kentucky was there that kind of atmosphere for what we did as kids by going there and having those pickup games and playing all the time? I mean, we played 6 days a week, 5 days a week. And think about that. Think about the interest that Marvin Hall took in me. Think about the interest that Ernie Chatton and Bo McMillan took in me to allow me to go to college, to get a college degree, then to build a national reputable company simply because my dad said, you're going to go to college. And I couldn't have gone to college if I didn't have what happened in Central Park.
And every time I would go back, I would go back to Central Park. And it wasn't a situation that was planned. I didn't get in the car and say I'm headed to Central Park, but I'd be driving someplace and pass it, and I could not go. The first place I went actually was to CP2, because in 1953, when I got out of grade school, Dale Griffith came by on a bicycle and said, get on the handlebars, you're going to play baseball for Coach Wright. Mr. Wright said, you're going to play third base. I had played third as a 5th grader at Charles Russell and pitched as a 6th grader. I said, okay. And that was my introduction to Mr. Wright, to Pony League, and actually to CP2, other than seeing some softball games. So the place I would always head first, because that was what drew me. Those feelings about first being there. I would go over to CP2 and I would go out to third base and I would stand there. And I would look at the dirt and I would actually feel the dirt. And it would go through my mind, as silly as it might seem, this may be the same dirt that I was playing in when I first started Pony League.
When I go back to visit relatives in the Ashland area, there's no time that I've gone back that I don't go to Central Park to this day. It's just that, it's like a magnet that draws you there. That is you. Central Park is you. CP1 is me.
I went back to the big ball field, just me. No one else was around. And then I saw a boy there, but the boy did not see me. Quietly, I watched from a distance as the boy flawlessly fielded ground balls. And then he stepped to the plate and hit a ball in the gap. And he ran the bases with speed I can only imagine today. As the boy stood on second base, dusting off his pants, I dared go closer, and I finally saw the boy's face. And then I realized that the boy was me.
Had not been back for, 40 years, I guess. Hadn't been on the mound since '63, and went to Central Park, and of course we're all drawn toward the big diamond, and went out, actually stood on the mound and reflected back, and then I looked over and said goodbye to Frank Wagner, who was our first baseman, who's now passed on. Said goodbye to Bob Yancey, who's passed on. Said hi to Nick Jordan, my catcher, and Regenus, Daniels, Chipper Miller, all the guys that I'd played with, and just thought back about the wonderful memories, just being part of a great team. It was just really special.
Well, it all started as an 11-year-old in this park, playing for Ballard's TV on CP2. I was always in awe of big boys that played on Diamond number 1, hoping someday that I could be there. And I worked hard as a youngster with my teaching of my father and his support. And one day I finally made it here. And the day that I stepped on this diamond as a sophomore playing for the Ashland Tomcats was one of the proudest moments in my life.
Young, I rode my bike down to the park. I'd stay there watching baseball until dark. I'd play games behind the dugout with my friends. We'd run those pop can bases, just trying to pretend that it was us on that field, looking bigger than we were. Was it all that we dreamed and everything we'd heard? Playing baseball on that big old field of dreams seemed 100 years away. One more out. But now I'm looking back amazed at how it seems. Playing just like yesterday. 5 years later, I can still recall the day when I first walked out onto that big field to play, with my dad giving signs as he was tugging at his feet. Go! I didn't know if I'd come through, but he sure believed, 'cause it was me on that field, stepping slowly to the plate, with his words in my head, saying, son, don't swing too late. Playing baseball on that big old field of dreams seemed 100 years away. Playing there was just like yesterday. We were young and we were free, loving the camaraderie, learning how to lose and win, and how to go from boys to men. Now I stand up in the batter's box again. Look around the big field as I try to take it in. I remember how I ran around with ease, as I walk around the bases and relive the memories of those who played on that field, where I learned about the game as another generation prepares to do the same. Playing baseball on that big old field of dreams seemed 100 years away. But now I'm looking back amazed at how it seems. laying there was just like yesterday, just like yesterday. It was just like yesterday.